Hello, welcome to Psych Minds. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe to the channel. We are reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, chapter 19. I'm going to be a psychiatrist. Joanne spoke with her usual breathy enthusiasm. We were drinking apple cider in the Belsize lounge. Oh, I said dryly. That's nice. I have had a long talk with Dr. Quinn, and she thinks it's perfectly possible. Dr. Quinn was Joanne's psychiatrist, a bright, shrewd, single lady, and often thought if I had been assigned to Dr. Quinn, I would be still in Kaplan or more probably Weimar. Dr. Quinn had an abstract quality that appealed to Joanne, but it gave me the polar chills. Joanne chattered on about egos and needs, and I turned my mind to something else, to the brown, unwrapped package in my bottom drawer. I never talked about egos and needs with Dr. Nolan. I didn't know just what I talked about, really. I'm going to live out now. I tuned in on Joanne then. Where? I demanded, trying to hide my envy. Dr. Nolan said my college would take me back for the second semester on her recommendation and Philomena Guinea scholarship, but as the doctors vetoed my living with my mother in the interim, I was staying on at the asylum until the winter term began. Even so, I felt it unfair of Joanne to beat me through the gates. Where? I persisted. They're not letting you live on your own, are they? Joanne had only that week been given town privileges again. Oh no, of course not. I'm living in Cambridge with Nurse Kennedy. Her roommates just got married and she needs someone to share the apartment. Cheers! I raised my apple cider glass and we clinked. In spite of my profound reservations, I thought I would always treasure Joanne. It was as if we had been forced together by some overwhelming circumstance like war or plague and shared a world of our own. When are you leaving? Oh, on the first of the month. Nice. Joanne grew wistful. You will come visit me, won't you, Esther? Of course. But I thought, not likely. It hurts, I said. Is it supposed to hurt? Irwin didn't say anything. Then he said, sometimes it hurts. I had met Irwin on the steps of the Widener Library. I was standing at the top of the long flight overlooking the red brick building that walled the snow filled quad and preparing to catch the trolley back to the asylum, when a tall young man with a rather ugly and bespectacled but intelligent face came up and said, could you please tell me the time? I glanced at my watch, 4:05. Then the man shifted his arm around the load of books he was carrying before him like a dinner tray and revealed a bony wrist. Why, you ever watch yourself? The man looked ruefully at his watch. He lifted it and shook it by his ear. Doesn't work. He smiled engagingly. Where are you going? I was about to say back to the asylum, but the man looked promising, so I changed my mind. Home. Would you like some coffee first? I hesitated. I was due at the asylum for supper, and I didn't want to be late so close to being signed out of there for good. A very small cup of coffee. I decided to practice my new normal personality on this man who, in the course of my hesitations, told me his name was Irwin and that he was a very well paid off professor of mathematics. So I said, all right, and matching my stride to Irwin strolled down the long, ice encrusted flight at his side. It was only after seeing Irwin study that I had decided to seduce him. Irwin lived in a murky, comfortable basement apartment in one of the rundown streets of outer Cambridge and drove me there. For a beer, he said, after 3 cups of bitter coffee in a student cafe. We sat in his study on stuffed brown leather chairs, surrounded by stacks of dusty, incomprehensible book with huge formulas and set artistically on the page like poems. While I was sipping my first glass of beer, I have never really cared for cold beer in midwinter, but I accepted the water to have something solid to hold on to. The doorbell rang. Irwin seemed embarrassed. I think it may be maybe a lady. Irwin had a queer old world habit of calling women ladies. Fine, fine. I gestured largely. Bring her in. Irwin shook his head. You would upset her. I smiled into my amber cylinder of cold beer. The doorbell rang again with a peremptory jab. Irvin sighed and rose to answer it. The minute he disappeared, I whipped into the bathroom and concealed behind the dirty aluminium colored Venetian blind. Watched Irvin's monkish face appear in the door crack. A large, bossomy Slavic lady in a bulky sweater of natural sheep's wool, purple slacks, high heeled black overshoes with Persian lamb cuffs, and a matching toque, puffed white inaudible words into the wintry air. Irvin's voice drifted back to me through the chilly hall. I'm sorry, Olga. I'm working. Olga. No, I don't think so, Olga. All the while, the lady's red mouth moved and the words, translated to white smoke, floated up among the branches of the naked mag by the door. Then finally, perhaps, Olga. Goodbye, Olga. I admired the immense steppe like expanse of the lady's wool clad bosom as she retreated. A few inches from my eye, down the creaking wooden stair, a sort of Siberian bitterness on her vivid lips. I suppose you have lots and lots of affairs in Cambridge, I told Irvin cheerily as I stuck a snail with a pin in one of Cambridge's determinately French restaurants. I see, Irwin admitted with a small modest smile. To get on with the ladies. I picked up my empty snail shell and drank the herb green juice. I had no idea if this was proper, but after months of wholesome, dull asylum diet, I was greedy for butter. I had called Dr. Nolan from a payphone at the restaurant and asked for permission to stay overnight in Cambridge with Joanne. Of course, I had no idea whether Irvin would invite me back to his apartment after dinner or not, but I thought his dismissal of the Slavic lady, another professor's wife, looked promising. I tipped back my head and poured down a glass of Nuit Saint George. You do like wine, Irvin observed. Only Nuit Saint George, I imagine him, with the dragon. Irvin reached for my hand. I felt the first man I slept with must be intelligent, so I would respect him. Irvin was a full professor at 26 and had a pale, hairless skin of a boy genius. I also needed somebody quite experienced to make up for my lack of it, and Irvin's ladies reassured me on this head. Then, to be on the safe side, I wanted somebody I didn't know and wouldn't go on knowing, a kind of impersonal, priest like official, as in the tales of tribal rites. By the end of the evening, I had no doubts about Irvin whatsoever. Ever since I had learned about the corruption of Buddy Willard, my virginity weighed like a millstone around my neck. It had been of such enormous importance to me for so long that my habit was to defend it at all costs. I had been defending it for 5 years and I was sick of it. It was only as Irwin swung me into his arms back at the apartment and carried me, wine dazed and limp, into the pitch black bedroom that I murmured, You know, Irwin, I think I ought to tell you. I'm a virgin. Irwin laughed and flung me down on the bed. A few minutes later, an exclamation of surprise revealed that Irwin hadn't really believed me. I thought how lucky it was I had started practicing birth control during the day, because in my whiny state that night I would never have bothered to perform the delicate and necessary operation. I lay wrapped and naked on Irwin's rough blanket, waiting for the miraculous change to make itself felt. But all I felt was a sharp, startling bad pain. It hurts, I said. Is it supposed to hurt? Irwin didn't say anything. Then he said, Sometimes it hurts. After a while, after a little while, Irwin got up and went into the bathroom, and I heard the rushing of shower water. I wasn't sure if Irwin had done what he planned to do or if my virginity had obstructed him in some way. I wanted to ask him if I was still a virgin, but I felt too unsettled. A warm liquid was seeping out between my legs. Tentatively, I reached down and touched it. When I held my hand up to the light streaming in from the bathroom, my fingertips looked black. Irwin, I said nervously, bring me a towel. Irwin strolled back, a bath towel knotted around his waist, and tossed me a second, smaller towel. I pushed the towel between my legs and pulled it away almost immediately. It was half black with blood. I'm bleeding, I announced, sitting up with a start. Oh, that often happens, Irwin reassured me. You'll be all right. Then the stories of blood-stained bridal sheets and the capsules of red ink bestowed on already deflowered brides floated back to me. I wondered how much I would bleed and lay down, nursing the towel. It occurred to me that the blood was my answer. I couldn't possibly be a virgin anymore. I smiled into the dark. I felt part of a great tradition. Surreptitiously, I applied a fresh section of white towel to my wound, thinking that as soon as the bleeding stopped, I would take the late trolley back to the asylum. I wanted to brood over my new condition in perfect peace. But the towel came away black and dripping. I think I better go home, I said faintly. Surely not so soon. Yes, I think I better. I asked if I could borrow Irwin's towel and packed it between my thighs as a bandage. Then I pulled on my sweaty clothes. Irwin offered to drive me home, but I didn't see how I could let him drive me to the asylum, so I dug in my pocketbook for Joanne's address. Irwin knew the street and went out to the car to start the car. I was too worried to tell him I was still bleeding. I kept hoping every minute that it would stop. But as Irwin drove me through the barren, snow banked streets, I felt the warm seepage let itself through the dam of the towel and my skirt and onto the car seat. As we slowed, cruising by house after lit house, I thought how unfortunate it was I had not discarded my virginity while living at college or at home, where such concealment would have been impossible. Joanne opened the door with an expression of glad surprise. Irwin kissed my hand and told Joanne to take good care of me. I shut the door and leaned back against it, feeling the blood drain from my face in one spectacular flush. Why, Esther? Joanne said. What on earth is the matter? I wondered when Joanne would notice the blood trickling down my legs and oozing stickily into each black patent leather shoe. I thought I could be dying from a bullet wound, and Joanne would still stare through me with her blank eyes, expecting me to ask for a cup of coffee and a sandwich. Is that nurse here? No, she's on night duty at Kaplan. Good. I made a little bitter grin as another soak of blood let itself through the drenched padding and started the tedious journey into my shoes. I mean, bad. You look funny, Joanne said. You better get a doctor. Why? Quick. But still, she hadn't noticed anything. I bent down with a brief grunt and slipped off one of my winter cracked black Bloomingdale shoes. I held the shoe up before Joanne's enlarged pebbly eyes tilted it and watched her take in the stream of blood that cascaded onto the beige rug. My God, what is it? I am hemorrhaging. Joanne half led, half dragged me to the sofa and made me lie down. Then she propped some pillows under my blood-stained feet. Then she stood back and demanded, Who was that man? For one crazy minute, I thought Joanne would refuse to call a doctor until I confessed the whole story of my evening with Irwin, and that after my confession, she would still refuse as a sort of punishment. But then I realized that she honestly took my explanation at face value, that my going to bed with Irwin was utterly incomprehensible to her, and his appearance a mere prick to her pleasure at my arrival. Oh, somebody, I said, with a flabby gesture of dismissal. Another pulse of blood released itself, and I contracted my stomach muscle in alarm. Get a towel. Joanne went out and came back almost immediately with a pile of towels and sheets. Like a prompt nurse, she peeled back my blood-wet clothes, drew a quick breath as she arrived at the original royal red towel, and applied a fresh bandage. I lay trying to slow the beating of my heart as every beat pushed forth another gush of blood. I remembered a worrisome course in the Victorian novel where woman after woman died, palely and nobly in torrents of blood, after a difficult childbirth. Perhaps Irwin had injured me in some awful, obscure way, and all the while I lay there on Joanne's sofa, I was really dying. Joanne pulled up an Indian hassock and began to dial down the long list of Cambridge doctors. The first number didn't answer. Joanne began to explain my case to the second number, which did answer, but then broke off and said, I see, and hung up. What's the trouble? He'll only come for regular customers or emergencies. It's Sunday. I tried to lift my arm and look at my watch, but my hand was a rock at my side and wouldn't budge. Sunday, the doctor's paradise. Doctors at country clubs, doctors at the seaside, doctors with mistresses, doctors with wives, doctors in church, doctors in yachts, doctors everywhere resolutely being people, not doctors. For God's sake, I said, tell them I am in emergency. The third number didn't answer, and at the fourth, the party hung up the minute Joanne mentioned it was about a period. Joanne began to cry. Look, Joanne, I said painstakingly, call up the local hospital, tell them it's an emergency. They will have to take me. Joanne brightened and dialed a fifth number. The emergency service promised her a staff doctor would attend to me if I could come into the ward. Then Joanne called a taxi. Joanne insisted on riding with me. I clasped my fresh padding of towel with a sort of desperation as the cabby, impressed by the address Joanne gave him, cut corner after corner in the dawn pale streets and drew up with a great squeals of tires at the emergency ward entrance. I left Joanne to pay the driver and hurried into the empty, glaring lit room. A nurse bustled out from behind a white screen. In a few swift words, I managed to tell her the truth about my predicament before Joanne came in the door, blinking and wide eyed as a myopic owl. The emergency ward doctor strolled out then, and I climbed, with the nurse's help, on the examining table. The nurse whispered to the doctor, and the doctor nodded and began unpacking the bloody toweling. I felt his fingers start to probe, and Joanne stood, rigid as a soldier, at my side, holding my hand for my sake or hers, I couldn't tell. Ouch! I winced at a particularly bad jab. The doctor whistled. You are one in a million. What do you mean? I mean, it's one in a million it happens to like this. The doctor spoke in a low, curt voice to the nurse, and she hurried to a side table and brought back some rolls of gauge and silver instruments. I can see, the doctor bent down, exactly where the trouble is coming from. But can you fix it? The doctor laughed. Oh, I can fix it all right. I was roused by a tap on my door. It was past midnight and the asylum quiet as death. I couldn't imagine who would still be up. Come in. I switched on the bedside light. The door clicked open and Dr. Quinn's brisk dark head appeared in the crack. I looked at her with surprise because although I knew who she was and often passed her with a brief nod in the asylum hall, I never spoke to her at all. Now she said, Miss Greenwood, may I come in a minute? I nodded. Dr. Quinn stepped into the room, shutting the door quietly behind her. She was wearing one of her navy blue immaculate suits with a plain, snow-white blouse showing in the V of the neck. I'm sorry to bother you, Miss Greenwood, and especially at this time of night, but I thought you might be able to help us out about John. For a minute, I wondered if Dr. Quinn was going to blame me for Joanne's return to the asylum. I still wasn't sure how much Joanne knew after our trip to the emergency ward, but a few days later, she had come back to live in Belsize, retaining, however, the freest of town privileges. I'll do what I can, I told Dr. Quinn. Dr. Quinn sat down on the edge of my bed with a grave face. We would like to find out where Joanne is. We thought you might have an idea. Suddenly, I wanted to dissociate myself from Joanne completely. I don't know, I said coldly. Isn't she in her room? It was well after the Belsize curfew hour. No, Joanne had a permit to go to the movie in town this evening, and she is not back yet. Who was she with? She was alone. Dr. Quinn paused. Have you any idea where she might be likely to spend the night? Surely she'll be back. Something must have held her up, but I didn't see what could have held Joanne up in tame night Boston. Dr. Quinn shook her head. The last trolley went by an hour ago. Maybe she'll come by taxi? Dr. Quinn sighed. Have you tried the Kennedy girl? I went on. Where Joanne used to live? Dr. Quinn nodded. Her family? Oh, she would never go there. But we have tried them too. Dr. Quinn lingered a minute as if she could sniff out some clue in the still room. Then she said, Well, we'll do what we can, and left. I turned out the light and tried to drop back to sleep, but Joanne's face floated before me, bodiless and smiling like the face of the Cheshire cat. I even thought I heard her voice rustling and hushing through the dark, but then I realized it was only the night wind in the asylum trees. Another tap woke me in the frosty grey dawn. This time I opened the door myself. Facing me was Dr. Quinn. She stood at attention like a frail drilled surgeon, but her outline seemed curiously smudged. I thought you should know, Dr. Quinn said. Johan has been found. Dr. Quinn's use of the passive slowed my blood. Where? In the woods, by the frozen pond. I opened my mouth, but no words come out. One of the orderlies found her, Dr. Quinn continued. Just now, coming to work. She's not dead, said Dr. Quinn. I'm afraid she has hanged herself. That brings us to the end of chapter 19. Fuck. We will be reading the next chapter and also the last chapter in our next reading. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe to the channel. Like, share, and subscribe if you like it. Bye bye for now. If there is any feedback also, you can reach out to me in the comment section or in the community section of the video that you're viewing. Bye, take care, keep reading.